So introductions. We have with us Reverend Danny Lieberger, and he's a planting pastor of the Well. His vision was to create a compelling space or compelling spaces that engage those who feel far from God. Outside of pastoring the Well, Danny also hosts a growing podcast called The Deconstruction Zone, which attempts to take a fresh look at engaging the conversation of deconstructing one's faith. I can't wait to hear more about what that means. I have listened to the podcast, so I'm not going to give any spoiler alerts there, but looking forward to everyone hearing about that. Danny and his wife, Annie, live in St. Louis, in the St. Louis region, and they have 3 kiddos, Knox, JoJo, and Gracie. And we also have with us a new colleague that I met on a clergy retreat in New Orleans. His name is Reverend Drake Cromer Moore, and he is in the car, if you can see him, if he's on screen. There he is. He is the pastor of First Christian Church of Gainesville, Florida, and a member of the lead team of Maison Mission. Am I saying it right?
It's Maison Mission, but you're pretty close.
Maison Mission. And he's very passionate about creating greater spaces for people to hear and experience the good news of Jesus. Drake and his husband Brent live in Gainesville with their 4 dogs. Their names all start with R, and I had to read them like 3 times because I was like, wait, they have the same name. And I was like, no, one's Ruby, one's Rudy, Roxy, and Reba. So welcome both of you for being here. So excited to hear from you and sharing this time together. So I will hand it over to you two to give us some wisdom. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, let's do this. We're going to get into it. Drake, do you want to kick us off or do you want me to kick us off?
Well, Paul's looking for his sunglasses, so I'm going to let you kick it off, and then I'll kick us off after that.
I love that. All right. Well, hey, so as you all heard, I'm Danny and have a new church in St. Louis. And I can't remember the exact title of our breakout, but something to do with like marketing your church and kind of helping grow that, specifically maybe marketing it as an affirming or inclusive church space as well. And for the Well, like our church just turned 15 months old, and that was the biggest and most important thing for us. Is there's a lot of churches in Missouri. Missouri is maybe not the Bible Belt, but we got a lot of churches to compete with the Bible Belt. And so it's a very like saturated market. There's a lot of evangelical churches, a lot of Catholic churches, but there's not a lot of inclusive churches, and specifically not a lot of more modern inclusive churches. And so we knew that for us, a really important thing was to make sure people knew who we were, what we were about, and how to find us. Because as many of y'all know, whether you go to church, you leave the church, or whatever, people don't just accidentally stumble upon your church. Now, we are a little lucky in that regard because our church does meet in a brewery on Sunday morning. So there are people that do accidentally come to our church from time to time. But I know that's not the commonplace for everybody. So, but I thought maybe I know I got a little bit of an introduction. So I just wanted to introduce myself in that way and kind of say kind of who I am and why this conversation's interesting. Like I didn't study marketing in college. I didn't study it in seminary. I actually found many of the things I learned in seminary were generally unhelpful for what it meant to do pastoral ministry as a whole. And I had to learn a lot of these other things on the fly. And so as we kind of dive into this conversation today, as Drake and I kind of chatted about this beforehand, we really want it to be just like practical and something that is like, if you leave tomorrow or leave tonight, you have some actual and actionable steps for how you can get the name out for your church, get the word out, and also to have clarity of vision. That's something that we kind of want to talk about too, because I think maybe an overlooked part of the marketing process is just clarity on what you're communicating and what you're marketing. And so that'll have kind of a common thread. So Drake, do you want to hop in real quick and just, do you have anything you want to add to that before we start marching through?
Yeah, so I wanted to provide just a little bit of clarity on First Christian and Maison. So I've pastored First Christian Church of Gainesville, Florida, because there is a First Christian Church of Gainesville, Texas, and a First Christian Church of Gainesville, Florida. So it's First Christian Church of Gainesville, Georgia. So there's two others. And and we have existed doing ministry in Gainesville for the last 102 years now. We were founded in 1921 as a house church. And so we have been, historically for the last 4 decades or so, we've been in a pretty steep decline. And so I came in and, and it was COVID, mind you, but when I came in, we were 8 people, in a building for 120. And so we've been trying to kind of figure that out. And then recently, as in last year, I met Kevin Brushert, who pastors Maison Mission, which is a new church plant. Very similar to the Well, actually, but they were non-denominational. So Maison, I think, just had its 3rd year anniversary, but they have only been meeting in person since January of last year. And so when I met Kevin, they were also meeting in a brewery, and I offered them space at First Christian, and they ended up actually, they're now pursuing becoming a congregation in formation with the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And so it's really exciting. In Florida, as far as new churches are concerned, most of our new churches are our Hispanic congregations, and so it's definitely out of the norm to have a new church plant in Florida that's not a Hispanic congregation. And so it's really cool to kind of be doing something a little bit different. And so I joined their lead team, and we're currently working on a merger of First Christian Church and Maison Mission as a new disciples congregation here in Gainesville. And so Maison comes from a Greek word that means greater. Maison Mission is all about creating greater spaces for people to hear and experience the good news of Jesus. And so, and the reason I say that is because that's our whole vision thing. And I agree with Danny. I think one of the things that we overlook is vision. And it's really hard to have good marketing or know who you want to reach without knowing that, who you want to be as a church. Other than that, Danny, if you want to keep going.
No, that's great. And not just who you want to reach, but like why you want to reach them. That's also a really important thing, like understanding as we march through that. So I thought what would be helpful, is kind of creating shared language as we dive into this together. And so just from anyone that's here, what would you define, how would you define marketing? Does anyone have when you think about this, we come in with our preconceived notions or baggage of what we're even talking about. So when y'all think about marketing, whether it's phrases or words, does anything initially just pop out to you? Whether it's a sentence or a word to start to try to attempt to define that.
I think most of you are muted, so you can, selling, someone in the chat said selling. You can also come off mute. Selling, advertising.
Yeah. So, and actually that's great. I love the chat function of this. So if y'all have things, throw them in there, even at, I would say use the chat as a stream of consciousness for us, throw stuff in there as we're going through here. I have it pulled up on the side so I can see it. Persuasion, I think that's interesting. So when you think about marketing, from my perspective, and again, I'm not a marketing guru by any stretch, Drake is not either, but one of the things that I would say has helped our church is I define it as hyper-focused communication. When we're marketing, we're being very, very focused. And so we didn't say this necessarily in my intro, but so the Well, my podcast, and myself have all very specific and growing reaches on Instagram and TikTok and things like that. And the way that we have gone about doing that is by being hyper-focused in what we're communicating. So if you went to my personal TikTok page, which has seen something like a dozen or so people in the last couple of months come to our church in person. It's brought them there from across the country, not just in St. Louis. There's about 13,000 people or whatever that follow it. You would get a very unique message there. If you went to our churches, which we get about, again, 2 to 4 people a month that come to our church through that. It's actually our biggest growth engine is our TikTok. You would get a very specific and curated conversation there. And our podcast one, it's the exact same thing. It's about 6,000 people, and you get a very specific kind of curated message there. And so when we have kind of like processed for our church, like when we're thinking about marketing, as Drake said, like the vision of what each thing is trying to communicate has been really important. So for my personal page, something that's been really, really important is I almost exclusively talk about kind of not just in LGBTQ inclusion, but clobber passages in whole, whether it's women in ministry or LGBTQ inclusion or even inerrancy of scripture. Like a lot of my conversation there is hyper focused on kind of undoing and supplanting a different theology around stuff. If you went to our church one, you would think that the only thing we ever talked about on any given weekend was LGBTQ inclusion. You would imagine that it's the only thing we cared about. Now, if you came to our church on a Sunday, I actually just talked to a lesbian couple that came to our church this Sunday. They were like, I thought for sure it was going to be a bunch of queer families and like they were going to be all in their 30s and super hipster. And our church has like people in their 80s. We have people in their 20s. We have 25% of our attendance this last Sunday was 9 years old and younger. And it's a pretty like big mix of straight folks and queer folks. And so it's been an interesting conversation there, but we've been really focused. The Deconstruction podcast is the exact same thing. It's only content from our podcast to push people to listen to that. But each one, like one of the things I learned really early on in kind of creating those platforms is there's no margin for deviating from the script and no margin for overlap. The moment your vision becomes fractured or you try to be everything to everyone or try to be more than what that thing is, it starts to crumble and fall apart. And so for us, if I was to give us like a working definition for marketing and what we're kind of hoping to chat about and hope to push us towards is it's like hyper singularly focused communication of your why or your vision or whatever that looks like is kind of what we're going to chat about today. So Drake, I might kick it to you just as we kind of keep marching down this as far as kind of talking about it in terms of the LGBTQ plus inclusion aspect.
Yeah. So I think what's really interesting. So, I mean, first off, I do want to say that Danny's social media is significantly better than mine or my church's. Ours is fine, but Danny's really, really good at social media. So if you want to know stuff about social media, Danny's your guy. You can talk to me and I can do it because I'm young, but I'm not that good at it. Danny's really, really good at it. I think for me, where I specialize is boots on the ground. And that's actually, so working on this merger with Maison, the new title that we're workshopping for me is outreach pastor. And so that's my thing. And I think actually, it's not even interesting. It's one of my least favorite parts of my job is when I tell people I'm a pastor and I instantly get a look of disgust. Like I'm in Gainesville, Florida, and Gainesville, Florida is a university town. And it's very, 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 very liberal, which is fine, right? It's great, actually. But in saying that I'm a pastor, most people are instantly offended because they're assuming the positions that I hold, particularly as really obnoxious Christians, take most of the screen time on, in national news. And so what I always say is I say I'm a pastor, and then as they give me that face, I not stop them, but I say, but I'm the pastor of the kind of church that my husband comes to church with me. And instantly, like, they smile, they're interested, they want to know things about it, and they're interested in coming. And the reason I bring any of that up is because as somebody who's been part of disciples congregations for quite a few years now, I know that, disciples, churches can go either way, and that's totally okay. That's actually one of the things that drew me to the disciples in the first place. I was really keen on because I come from a Southern Baptist background. I was really keen on wanting the church to be about Jesus not about my sexuality, but at the same time being a place that not only acknowledged but celebrated who I was and who I loved. And so the reason that I asked that is because I think what Danny was getting at earlier with this hyper-focused concept of marketing is I think what's really important as we get into the concept of marketing our church as LGBTQIA plus inclusive, we need to be also in a space where we're willing to acknowledge where we truly are as a church. And the reason even when I was asked to be pastor at First Christian, there were lots of folks who left, and there were people who had told me the church was affirming, and it was almost there. It was like probably 80%. But I'm not sure that affirming was the best descriptor of First Christian Church. And so I think the question that I have, and whether that be out loud or that be in the chat, is honestly, where is your church? And the reason I say that is because we all want to be, if you're here, you probably want your church to be an open and inclusive environment if it's not already, and you want people to know that it's an open, inclusive, and safe space. But we have to make sure that when we're talking about marketing and we're talking about wanting to reach people and why we want to reach them, that marketing doesn't become something that's just another way to be all things to all people. Marketing doesn't just become something that's like another way to pander to an audience, but marketing is something that's intentionally driven to bring to your church the types of people that you want to reach and people that you want to know the gospel, people you want to be plugged into community, et cetera, et cetera. And so the question I have is where is your church as far as an affirming stance?
And that was to the group, not to me particularly.
No, I know where the well is. Yeah, that's to the group.
Drake, one of the primary reasons that I thought it was so important to have this conversation are the things that you're both addressing right now. And those two things are, marketing means that you have to have a clear vision. And there are so many churches who do not have a clear identity and vision to market effectively. How can you say who you are to the community that you're in if you don't know who you are? And then the other part of that, which you brought up, Drake, is that a lot of congregations have fallen into this, we're open and affirming, and you see it on the signs, all are welcome, but are you really? And there's a real danger in that, because when you say that you're offering a safe space for everyone, all are welcome, but then people who come into the church find out, well, I'm not the kind of person that sign is made for, and we don't want to be that. So I think it's really, if anybody has a vision, I think Danny, you put in here like kind of a vision statement. It'd be helpful to see some of those. And if you don't have a vision statement, I think that right there is the first thing that you all are saying is the most important thing about your marketing.
Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, like, an interesting thing for us is the Well has made its name for being an LGBTQ plus affirming and inclusive church. But one of the things we say on a weekly basis is our level and understanding of inclusion is far more expansive than someone's sexuality or gender. And so a common refrain we have is that we say you belong before you believe or behave any certain way. Like, we've kind of taken that mantra as well, but we say that your seat at the table can't cost someone else. And so our congregation has LGBTQ plus people and allies. We have Democrats and Republicans. We have people that are in Make Missouri Great Again hats, and we have people that are in Biden 20 whatever hats, right? And so we have a pretty diverse population. And for us, that has been also one of the greatest levels of not only advancing the kingdom in the sense that, like, people can be around a much more eclectic and diverse community. But as people have come into our church, they realize that though LGBTQ plus inclusion is an important thing for us and something that we hang our hat on, that truly at the highest level we seek inclusion, and we seek to be a safe space for people as they come and engage. And I think that would be a couple of our same-sex couples have made a point that like they appreciate our church because we're like their sexuality isn't preached about on a regular basis. And so inclusion doesn't just mean preaching about it. It doesn't even just mean like communicating about it. But for us, it's really meant like, how do we at every single level try to create a space that feels safe, that feels accepting, that feels challenging? Like we really want to challenge everyone to grow into greater depths of relationship with Jesus at our church. And so like we try not to avoid difficult topics of all kinds. So yeah, it's been interesting. I think marketing is maybe the easiest part of it, in the sense of like communicating. Like if you can get a vision, you can communicate it, that part's easy, but the lived experience of it has been the hardest part, as you come up with tensions of people trying to fracture that. A great book by Todd Bolsinger is Canoeing the Mountains, which it's a great leadership book. But that book talks a lot about really the fracturing of vision, and how there's going to be people that try to turn the ship around, try to change directions. And like your job as either the main leader or a key voice at the table is to be like relentlessly focused on that vision. And as you were just saying, like, I think that's why having a clear vision is so important. And Drake was saying the same thing. It's like, you can have all the marketing best practices, you can have the greatest intentions in the world, but if the clarity of what is being communicated to be invited to isn't clear, then it's going to be really like people just don't come to it, like because they don't know what they're coming into. Going to church is the most anxiety ridden hour of anyone's given week. And so if they're unclear about what they're stepping into, it's going to like, there's no chance they're coming in the first place. You know what I mean? So Drake. Oh, he's cutting out a little bit.
Yeah, I just walked into the church. I did want to say, I think what's really, really important here is that, like, I really love what Danny said. We have this guy, he's my grounds guy. He's been here for 25 years. His name's Chuck. And Chuck has been kind of like trying to figure out this whole LGBTQIA plus inclusion thing. And I mean, he's 87, and that's okay. And, a lot of people thought that he wasn't coming at first when I first was asked to be pastor, or when I first was called because of COVID. But the reality was he was trying to figure out if he was okay with having a gay pastor. And Chuck and I now have we have a fantastic relationship. We always have, but we've grown really close to the point where he was having very in-depth conversations with other pastors and trying to figure it out. And then on yesterday or 2 days ago, we had a wedding here that for a couple of our members, LGBTQ wedding, and he came, and watching him hug those two guys right after they got married as they were walking out was amazing. And I think, at least for me, I grew up with the concept of the ground is level at the foot of the cross, but I think in reality, the ground is level at the table. And that all goes back to, like, I don't want to take Chuck's seat at the table away. Like, it was beautiful to watch him figure it out over this last 3 or 4 years. And I think that there's a lot of people in a lot of your churches who are probably like that, and that's okay. But there's the commitment to inclusion, which Chuck has always had, is something that if you want to market to queer folks, that you've got to have.
Yeah. So thinking of like some tactical things as far as like communicating and marketing. Drake and I were chatting a little about this beforehand. One thing that's really important is like you wrestle with what this looks like for your church before you ever get into tactical things. Though this is tactical to some degree, is marketing is 100% external. It's so like our TikTok, our Instagram, those aren't for our people that are already with us. So it's not a bulletin, it's not an announcement. And so when I say this kind of like idea of singular focus, like a great first step as you start to curate content and start to create a brand and start to create stuff to communicate, if it's just communicating to the people that are already a part of the Sunday thing, then it's not going to achieve what your desired goal is. And that's even why like for us, like in our mission and vision statements, like everything points back to invitation. Like we deeply believe in invitation and inviting more people to experience love, grace, community, all those sorts of things, right? And so for us, a great first step is like whatever we're communicating, it's 100% external. And that doesn't mean like it doesn't tell stories of people that are inside. It can't be uplifting and consumed by people inside, but it's kind of has to be singularly focused to the person that's not yet here. The second, like, I mean, I think this is the greatest tip I learned. And this is how I went from 200 people to like 30,000 across all of our platforms in just a couple of months, was relentless commitment to creating content. I've taken a little bit of a hiatus because the comment section is kind of a nightmare right now. And it can suck my soul away sometimes, but if you watch anything on TikTok or Instagram or even Facebook, one of the things that people will tell you is, and there's really no science. Some people say make 1 post a day, some people say make 3 a day, but the reality is simply, for a couple of reasons, to create as much content as humanly possible for you, for a couple of reasons. One, it gets in front of more people. And 2, you start to learn like what your voice is, what people care about. Like the greatest market research for my Sunday sermons for our church has been simply through creating content, because I see what the rest of the world is interested in hearing. So even if your platform doesn't get past 60 people, you still get a better idea of like, hey, like what is our outside community, the people that aren't yet here, what are they interested in hearing? And so like if I was in your shoes and you're just now starting to think about this, like it could be a podcast. Like our podcast has just taken off and we're at episode 40, comes out tomorrow. But episodes 1 through 10, no one was listening to them, right? They had to keep going. Like for the first couple months of creating online content on TikTok, like no one was really consuming it. And then months later, it expanded and blew up, right? And so I think an important kind of key mantra to continue to repeat is like just create for the sake of defining your voice and for reaching new people and for thinking kind of outside of yourself. So but Drake, you might want to add more to that as well. But I mean, I would say though, like if I was giving 2 tangible, like, hey, here are like some great legitimate next steps, those would be my next steps for sure.
Yeah, Kerry Newhoff, he says that your social media should be not just your congregation, but also all of the friends of people within your congregation's favorite page to kind of stumble upon. And I think, like, I know I fall into the trap of like creating like, hey, we're having a Super Bowl party on Sunday, make sure you're there, which is like what most churches use their social media for. But social media is meant to be social. If you want bulletin announcements, then you can have a bulletin. If social media is to be social and to reach people, then what Danny said is really important. I think the second thing that's really, really important when it comes to social media and outreach is the fact that, like, I don't know, Danny, I know you get this. I know I get this. I know pretty much every affirming pastor that I know on TikTok gets content or gets comments that are asking like, oh my gosh, like I wish that I could find a church like yours near me, right? And what's so funny is I just received a phone call, I think it was middle of last week, from a church called The Harvest in Sarasota, Florida. And Danny, you got the phone call too, because she told me she called you or emailed you and was like, hey, like,
funny, I didn't know you talked to him. That's funny.
Yeah, like, hey, we're trying to compile a list of all of these churches, so that way people who ask the question, where is a church like yours near me, we can answer that, and because we're trying to create a list of churches that have similar values, similar blah blah blah, so we know that we can send our friends and our family and our congregation's friends and family to a safe place. Well, the thing is that their office manager stumbled on me on TikTok, and stumbled on Danny on TikTok, and stumbled on Maison on TikTok, and other places, and that's how they're able to curate this list. And the thing is, I know that most of your churches are these spaces too, and people need to know about them. Like I had a guy tithing to First Christian in California because he had never found a place that he felt like was his church home, more than watching my YouTube videos. That you're lucky if I get them uploaded on Wednesday, like. And so
I guess that's my encouragement. And then the second thing I think is really important, and I just wanted to go back to that vision for a minute, because I wanted to define it a little bit more, which is mission is the same for every single one of us, right? Like every single one of us, our mission is the gospel. It always has been and always will be. That's what I always say at First Christian. Like when we were founded in 1921, our mission was the gospel, and it still is today. How we live out that mission, which is our vision, is ever changing because the world's ever changing. And so mission being, why do we do what we do? Which simple answer is Jesus. And vision is how are we going to do that? And marketing and social media is definitely a key piece in 2023.
So Drake, you and Danny have really both hit on marketing as far as social media. What can you say to congregations who aren't really on social media? I think, COVID and the pandemic forced a lot of congregations, including my own, which may have never, been on Facebook Live and Zoom and any kind of platform outside of the sanctuary. And it got us to that space. But for us who aren't on TikTok and other platforms, what else can we do to market our church? And I appreciate what you said, Drake, about mission and being a part of community, because building those relationships are definitely a marketing aspect of the church and a claim of who we are and who we hope to be in our communities. But what else can you say to us about ways to market that aren't on those social media platforms?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I would say is, first off, when I first came to Gainesville, I wasn't going to visit First Christian Church, even though I was a disciple, because I assumed since their Facebook hadn't been updated in several years, that they were not an affirming church. So to put that out there, like, I understand that, like, we didn't have a website when I became pastor. I will say, however, that every new person that has come to FCC, and we've grown, by the way, from 8 people to 40 people, in the last 2 years, and that's trending upward. We had a Sunday a few weeks ago where we had, I think, like 52 or 53 people, and
it's great.
15 or 20 of them were brand new, like all on the same weekend. It was super weird. And so, that being said, like, I'm gonna keep going to the actual question that you asked, but I think one of the most valuable things that I've ever heard from a leader was that any church can have good social media. Not every church is going to have great social media, but every church can have good social media. And so I've found that people, especially young folks, and when I say young folks, I just mean sub 40, they're visiting you before they visit you. And so they're trying to find out as much about you online as they can. And so I think that's, especially as someone who is younger, and I will say that, like, I would never go to a church not sure if they were affirming if I couldn't find out if they were affirming online, because I don't want to put myself and my spouse into a situation that's unsafe. And so that would, for me, that's something that's really important, is to just say, like, hey, and one of the easiest steps that you can take, if you're not on social media, if you don't have a website, you're not on Facebook, any of those things, there's a website called gaychurch.org. And that's a really simple, really, really easy thing, that if you are an affirming church, that you can go on to gaychurch.org, request to submit your congregation, and upload the information that says, hey, we are an affirming congregation. I know that if you search gay church or LGBTQIA+ church or inclusive church, gaychurch.com is or gaychurch.org is one of the first websites to pop up. I know it's how I've found churches in the past. For me, it's how I refer LGBTQIA+ friends to churches. And so even if you're not on social media, even if you don't have a website, that would be the very first thing that I would say. I think the second thing that's really important is understanding what language is, as far as what language you're going to choose to use. And so, like Jamie, you mentioned earlier, church signs that say all are welcome. And that is a really overused phrase. All are welcome means, for most churches, all are welcome if you look like us, act like us, dance like us, talk like us, and vote like us. And maybe even if you're the same color and if you like the same kind of, if you're heteronormative or heterosexual. And so understanding what language to use. There's a local metropolitan community church that she always says that we're open and celebratory. And I find that really compelling. I often say that we are an affirming or open and celebratory church, rather than just saying, hey, we're inclusive, because what does that mean? We all are welcome. And so knowing what language you use, especially just in having conversations with people around town, right? Oh, I pastor or I attend First Christian Church of blank town. And they'll say, oh, tell me about your church. Oh, well, even open and affirming is a pretty tough phrase, because affirming is a very theological word that not a lot of people know. Like, the only way that you're going to know what affirming is if you're a queer Christian looking for a place that you can be a queer Christian, or you're an ally trying to be inclusive of folks. And so, you say we're an inclusive and celebratory community or church, and then that's going to cause questions, and people are going to be inquisitive of what that means. But I think it lays it out pretty well. We're celebratory, which means that all the places where we would celebrate a heterosexual couple, marriage, babies, all those types of things, we're also celebrating the queer couple. And all the places that we celebrate when somebody becomes a member, you're also celebrated, even if you're different from what the norm would be, right? I think celebratory is a really good word. Danny, if you have anything to add to that, but my two things would just be gay church. If I'm saying we're not going on social media, I'd say gaychurch.org is a huge one. And then the second thing that's really, really important is just being really intentional with the language that you choose, as far as having conversations with other folk.
Yeah, I agree with all that. That's all great. I would say, just to add to that, you could have 3 people in your congregation or 130 people. An easy way to market is to Google reviews. That's actually been one of the lowest hanging fruit for us. I just emailed our congregation. I said, hey, will you review our church on Google? And it pushes us up. People find us. Your people are excited to talk about your church. And if they're not, that's a great question to ask why they're not. But if they are, which they likely are, sharing that kind of stuff is massive. The other thing is, if you're not on social media, maybe your congregation is, and that's not just a young person's game. And so we talk a lot about invitation. At least one person in this Zoom has Yelped a restaurant they liked, or told someone about a movie they liked, or done something like that. And asking people to do the same thing with their church is a really important thing. And so church, social media is great. I think it's overrated to some degree, especially in some time consumed, but personal invitation will outdo any level of other external marketing. And so I think encouraging your congregation to be your greatest marketers will be the easiest thing. And so that's so again, we asked our congregation to Google review us. If you Google the Well 636, there's a ton of stuff that pops up on Google. If you Google my name, a ton of stuff pops up. So we're easy to find. And that's an important thing too. And I'm not great. It's called SEO, search engine optimization. I'm not great at that kind of stuff, but you can build, and Drake, you were kind of touching on this a little bit, you can build certain keywords that help people find you, that's found on your website. And so I don't know how many of you do your own websites and stuff like that, but that's something that you can figure out as well. But I think honestly, our church will we're growing nationally with people that don't live in St. Louis faster than we're growing with people in social media is reaching people that aren't in Missouri for me. And so we've had to use much more localized things to grow in our own context and region. And social media is great. That's how Drake and I found each other. We connected that way. We started a group called the Harbor Collective, where we connect with other inclusive and affirming churches across the country, just to add support and kind of community for them, not just pastors, but lay leaders. And so it's been an amazing way to network and to grow. But I will always beat the drum of personal invitation is going to be your greatest marketing tool as well. You can have the coolest social media in the world, but marketing will come down to, and this goes back to your vision, right? We're talking about if your congregation's so on fire with the vision, then they're going to want to share it with people, and they're going to want to invite people to it. And I think that's a easy thing to overlook. But if your congregation's not inviting people on a semi-regular, that doesn't mean every Sunday, but on a monthly basis or quarterly basis, even, there's probably something to be said. It's like, it's not your preaching that's the problem. It's not your website or your slides or your coffee. It's that they haven't caught excitement around the vision, that they want to share and invite someone to that. And for me, like, I always wanted to work at a church that I felt comfortable and I wanted to invite my friends to. And I've worked at 5 churches in my life, and luckily 2 of those churches I've wanted to invite people to. And I think like that's an important thing too. It's like, do you want to invite people to this thing? And does your congregation want to invite people to that thing? Is one of the most important parts of marketing. And things like gay church is great, Google stuff is great, but it's going to come like, and this is what Drake and I spent a lot of our time pre-gaming about, was just saying like, all of it's for naught if there's not a clear and concise and really compelling vision that people are being invited into. Yes, it's the gospel. Yes, we've got the Great Commission, but like, what is the unique vision of First Gainesville, of Maison, of the Well, of any of our churches, right? So,
yeah, I think I was just gonna say one thing. I think one of those things, Danny, that you said that really is like, is your vision white hot on the hearts of your congregation? Because like all the how, like social media, gay church, and all that kinds of stuff, those are all important, but they don't hold candle to if the why or your vision isn't white hot. I think one of the things that I ran into in the last couple of years that I found really, really interesting was that nobody at First Christian Church knew the mission statement. And that's because nobody had looked at the bylaws since 2009. And so nobody really even knew why we were doing what we were doing. And then we had a small vision statement, which was love all, serve all, but nobody really knew what that meant. And we had to figure that out. And it took time, and it took practice, and it took everybody trying to figure out why they were here and why they wanted other people to be here. And that kind of that led to the invitation and to the marketing and to all of that stuff. But the why is really important.
So we have like other stuff that we could dive into, but I think what actually might be the most helpful is just like to turn it to y'all. Like if there's any, like whether it's tactical questions or vision, like any, like really everything's in bounds, nothing's out of bounds. So for our kind of final 15 minutes, like would anyone in the room just be interested in like throwing out questions, kind of like letting you guys help curate and guide where we're going for the kind of final minutes?
We do have our regional minister, Bishop Valerie Melvin, on this call. And she posed a question that says, basically, help us to understand the meanings of welcoming, open, and affirming congregations. And I think, Drake, you hit on that just a little bit, but I think the confusion comes in because we all use that language, but is there really a definition that's is there a clear definition when we use that? Like, I might say that and mean one thing for my congregation. So help us to understand what you were saying about language and how and what language is the key language we should be using.
Yeah, so I think open and affirming is really good and really important. I think that that's something that you should use because there are people who look for that. I think welcoming is also a really great phrase, but you're right. I mean one thing when I say welcoming, and the Southern Baptist down the street means something entirely different when he says his church is welcoming. And so I think I will say, just to start, I think that there's some power in reclamation. Like there is some power in calling your church an affirming or a welcoming church and truly meaning it. Like there is something there. The problem is it gets muddied right out in the social waters of your community. And so I think the one for me that really stands out, and the one that we've started using at Maison, is celebratory. Open and affirming means that you are open, and affirming meaning that you affirm LGBTQIA+ persons and their relationships.
And so that would be, hey, this is a safe place for a gay or lesbian or transgender couple to get married. This is a place where somebody who's transgender can serve in leadership. This is a place where we can have gay clergy, right? That would be open and affirming. This is a place where a gay couple's kid can be baptized or confirmed. That is open and affirming, and that's really important. The problem is that that's a really theologically heavy phrase, and so that's a phrase that's really good to use for the folks who know what it means. I think the most clear that I can be typically is that we're celebratory, and or inclusive and celebratory, and most of the time people ask questions, and then I always end up following it with that. We believe that all folks, regardless of race, gender, sexuality, or creed, are welcomed and loved by Jesus, and welcome into our church. And so that's very like disciples table, what we say before we invite people to the table. And I think that that's really, really important. But I think for simplicity's sake, I think inclusive and celebratory are the two words that I would use in tandem.
Danny, I'm going to give you an opportunity, but I just want to piggyback on that really quickly, because I think the problem comes in when congregations claim to be open and affirming. And so in their mindset, it is anyone can come and worship with us, but they tend to run into problems when those worshiping want to get married and they're not heterosexual couples, or their queer child wants to be baptized, or someone is transsexual and they didn't realize it at first, or, all of these things. So it's like, how open and affirming are you? And you need to be to the maxes of that before you make that claim.
Yes.
Yeah. So for us at the Well, I mean, and I'll put these in the chat. Like I've already said that your seat at the table can't cost someone else their seat, but we make a very common point. Like we don't use a lot of inclusive affirming, like we don't throw those terms around a ton because we have found them to be confusing or not helpful. But one of the things we say is that we say all people, but specifically LGBTQ plus people are invited into every level of life, leadership, and activity within the life of our church. I put life in there twice, shouldn't be there. But so I'm a United Methodist, and so that's not necessarily our denominational stance. And so right now we're in some like infighting about that. And I have people that come to our church, or they email me and say, hey, I want to come to your church. Are you guys United Methodist? Do you pay apportionments? Like all those things. And me, by answering yes, they're like, well, I'm not going to come to your church because you support a bigoted organization that's not fully inclusive, which I don't fully agree with that statement, but I understand the pushback. And so for us, we've really had to like come to a point where we articulate that what it means in the life of our local church to be included. And so at every level of whether it's baptism, marriage, leadership, like hiring, pastoral staff, preaching, like you're invited into every level of leadership. And that our congregation, we actually find it as a great missional thing for us that we're not in a fully affirming denomination, because we're actively being a voice of fighting for the change that we want to see. And I would say for y'all, I mean, from my understanding of the disciples, it's a much more affirming space as a whole. But I think when you're thinking, and this hopefully doesn't sound gross the way I say this, but when you're thinking of it a marketing perspective, being the dissenting voice is going to give you the greatest way to engage your audience around you. And so for us, it has nothing to do with marketing. It's a completely theological thing that we believe, and we're fighting for the change we want to see. But by being the only United Methodist Church in St. Charles County, Missouri, that's open and affirming to the level that we are, we have created a niche, and we're probably one of the only modern and affirming churches in our neighborhood. And so we have found that as our niche. And so, but when it comes to communicating those things, we're always very honest. We never pressure any LGBTQ plus folks from coming if they don't feel comfortable about the denominational decisions we make. I try to help them find the best congregation for them around us that is equally as or more affirming than we are. But we want to always communicate what that looks like for us. But also representation matters, right? So if you come to a Sunday at the Well, you're going to see women leading, you're going to see LGBTQ plus people leading, you're going to see people of color leading. There are people on board that didn't appreciate this, but I wasn't about to hire my first staff person was going to be another straight white guy. Like I just wasn't going to do it. And so we needed to figure out like how we were hiring people that represented the community we wanted to be. And so we hired an LGBTQ woman to come onto our staff because we knew that that helped. And she was very talented and the most talented person applying. But representation matters. Like if you walk in on a Sunday, and I just talked to Madison and Samara, they're a lesbian couple at our congregation. They walked in and they were like, I saw other people that looked like me. That was important to them. They also said that they were greeted by a bunch of straight people that never happened before in a church, and they were old and they didn't think that they would talk to them, and they were so sweet and nice. And so that matters too. But representation is really important, but also like lived out inclusion really matters. Like your congregation not being, for lack of a better term, weird, like is really important too. Like when people walk in, like creating a space that feels welcoming in that regard. And so, but it's hard. Like I'm fighting an uphill battle in my communication and marketing every day because of the Methodist Church's stance and the global method. I don't know how much you guys know about all of our crap, so I don't want to bore you, but like with the global Methodist Church, like that doesn't help my marketing at all because I have a whole new brand of the Methodist Church that's completely the opposite direction. And so we have to really do double time to make our stance of who we are and communicate who we are really clear and focused. So
yeah, Reverend Dr. Katie Hayes, she's a disciples minister at Galileo Christian Church. The third thing that she wishes every church believed is that it's really good to have a really bad reputation. to go on what you said, Danny. I think that that's really true. There was actually with us and Maison working together, there was a local church, one of the largest churches in the state of Florida, that's an Assemblies of God church. And the week after we preached a message on the inclusivity of Jesus, they preached a message on the exclusivity of Jesus. And I thought that was awesome. Like, I loved that somebody felt threatened enough by our inclusive presence that they wanted to preach a sermon on the exclusivity of Jesus. And they're a church of 6,000 people. So
I'm sure
this
that was
is
full of those clobber texts too, right? It was
almost
full of the
certainly.
clobber texts.
I would say so. Another thing, this isn't, I know pastors often get nervous about plagiarizing other people's sermons. I would say don't plagiarize people's sermons for sure. Social media content and marketing and sharing the great ideas that are out there is not plagiarism. And so I think to understand too, like, and Drake makes really great content. I'm like, I'm going to do that. And I'm sure Drake has seen things I've done and done the same thing. There's another pastor in a very rural place in Missouri that's trying to start something. I don't know if you know Drake. I don't know if you met him or not, but yeah. And so, but he very similar, like it's an open source sharing. And I would say something to understand is like, Ecclesiastes was right when they said there's nothing new under the sun, right? Like we're not really reinventing the wheel. And so sharing and using other content is important. And I think getting out of our own, I can be a prideful, arrogant guy. I'm not that creative. And so I had to realize that like I have to really lean on other people for that. And I think for us to get outside of our own pride and be like, let's just use some of the other great stuff is really important. This fits nowhere in my notes, but as far as creating content goes, this is the lowest hanging fruit. One of the lowest hanging fruits for starting is the difference between long form content and short form. So if y'all preach on a Sunday, you have long form content. You have 20 to 40 minutes of long form content. And the easiest way to get started is to edit that down into 30-second to 90-second clips. You have the content, you've made it already. And if all you have to do is put up an iPhone and you've got it captured. And so to use that is one of the easiest ways to get started. And an easiest way to start to like learn about your market. So I'd beat that drum till I'm blue in the face, just to be like, you already have the content somewhere and to start using it. And that's how I found Drake's.
Hey, 20 to 40 minute content, just so you know, what you're talking to disciples, what you mean is 10 to 17 minutes.
Is that how long I preach? I preach for like 17 minutes and I get told I preach too short. So
I preach for like 30 and everybody tells me that I preach too long. So, we're learning.
Yeah, about 15 minutes for me, and I've heard my voice way too much. It's over. We don't want to hear Jamie talk that much. So we are getting towards the end. We have just a few minutes, so let's open it up. And does anybody have any questions they would like to either put in the chat or just come off mute and ask those questions?
Danny and Drake, this is Valerie Melvin. I'm the regional minister. I am thankful that you could take the time to be with us on the East Coast through the medium of technology. How about that? Want to thank you so much for being with us. Danny and Drake, as a regional pastor, I am so concerned that even the subject of LGBTQIA+ has the ability to break the back of the church to the point that we be church no longer. We're all devastated with our United Methodist brothers and sisters in what has happened. It has hurt the entire church universal. Trust me, there are none of us that don't feel your pain. We're praying and we're here to do what we can to be helpful. But if there is one thing I desire in North Carolina, is that we be brave enough to have conversation. Because in all honesty, that's where understanding begins. We recently had a keynoter to share with us on Martin Luther King's holiday, the way we begin to be reconciled as a body around all of these issues is to kind of stop rehearsing the issues and begin to take the time to understand one another.
Amen.
And I have adopted that as something I'm trying to do even about other issues outside of a sexual orientation. And so I was thankful for you to give us a little bit clarity on the definitions: affirming, open and affirming, welcoming. And I appreciate you sharing the two terms, celebratory and inclusion or inclusive, because one of the things I'm running into when we talk about marketing, Danny and Drake, is that some of our churches have on their websites statements that are not true. We are open and affirming. And as Jamie said, that's only to come and worship. That's not for anything else. Or some may have, we are welcoming. And we might not quite understand what others think welcoming means. So I think that here in North Carolina, we want to work a little bit more diligently about making sure all of our congregations understand what words mean and the impact they have when we post them in our marketing strategies in technology. Because some, as you just shared tonight, someone will be drawn to us by what we post. And so it was helpful tonight to hear you talk about that. But I'm so proud, Christian Church in North Carolina, that there are 17 of us, there were 18 on this screen tonight, brave enough to have conversations. Okay. And so I want to thank both of you very much.
Thank you. Hey, Reverend, if I could share one thing, thank you for having us. But I think Andy Stanley, he's a pastor in Georgia. He said that we don't want to take people's churches away from them over issues. And,
yes.
And I think that that's really true. And the reason that I say that is because if a space is not a space for me to be in, then I don't need to be there. As much as I wish every church was inclusive, if a space is not a space for me to be in, then I don't need to be there. And there are not very many spaces that I can worship in with my husband.
Okay.
And so I have to be in the spaces that want me to be there fully. And the reason that I say that is because when I started attending First Christian, they were open and affirming. And then now as pastor, I have one of the former elders who is calling around because God woke him up and he's trying to get rid of me as pastor because he can't have a gay man in the pulpit. Right.
Okay.
And so, and the reason I say that is because, I had several people telling me, hey, you should be preaching, you have a ministry background, you should be preaching. I have a really interesting reason the way that I was called in. And I couldn't figure out why. And then finally the elders pulled me aside and said, we have one elder who just won't let you preach. And I would have much rather known that years before. And so I think for me, that's, like you said, language is really, really, really important. And now I'm so proud of where we are now, and I wouldn't change it for the world. but it could have saved a lot of pain on my part and on that gentleman and his wife's part who had been here for 40 years.
Okay.
You know, to define where we actually were as a church.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And I would just I'd piggyback on that. So the way the Methodist Church works, right? So we're itinerant and we get appointed. And so where I was before I started the well was I was at a church that was wonderful, loving. They were accepting but not affirming. And I think something that was really important for me as a leader there, I wasn't the senior pastor, but I was the executive pastor. And I think an important thing that I had to understand too is and I don't know where all of your churches stand. And so whether you're accepting or affirming, I do think it's important to understand how you help your congregation understand how best to interact and engage the community in a way that's not harming people. So the Methodist Church is do good, do no harm, and fall in love with Jesus, right? That's a paraphrase of our mantra. And so it's for us, it's how do we continue to love people? And so I would always tell our LGBTQ couples that would come to our church, you can serve, you can lead, but just so you know, our church won't do your wedding. I would love to do your wedding, but we won't do your wedding, right? You can get baptized here, but there's certain levels. And I didn't agree with that, but brutal honesty is only going to help everyone along the journey. And so if your congregation isn't there and you want it to be, I think it's communicating, this is where we are. I might be bummed about that, but you can't take people where they don't want to go. And so figuring out how you lead a congregation that may not be exactly where you are. And that was my biggest leadership thing I learned in my last 10 years of ministry, is how I lead and care for the people I have around me while fighting for the change I want to see without breaking the system and running out the congregation we have. Because there were tons of wonderful humans at this last church I was at, even though they weren't fully where I was at. And I had to engage them with curiosity and not arrogance. And I had to engage them with friendship in a Christ-like posture to then help them and help me understand them better. And so I think that's an important thing to understand, is your congregations are probably 100% not going to be aligned with you. Not everyone that goes to my church, not everyone that tithes, not everyone there agrees with me, but we've agreed to agree on everyone's seat at the table matters. And that's where we have landed. And so I think that was an important thing for us. And I'd rather have non-affirming people in our congregation that are sitting next to LGBTQ plus people and realizing they're humans and creating relationships that they didn't know they had. And I've watched that needle move for them. And I've also watched some of our more progressive people move the needle to be all conservative people aren't the worst, right? There's been this move to the middle of starting to realize we have created caricatures of people that aren't actually true. And building relationships is the only way to start to break those walls down.
Thank you. The Disciples of Christ, as you probably are aware, each congregation is autonomous. And that ranges from everything from history and polity to their theology. And so we have some that are progressive, we have some that are very conservative, even in their theology. And so we have an eclectic mix. And so what I have found, and I am very proud of this, is that most of every congregation that I have gone into, and I am the first female and first person of color to ever lead this fellowship of churches in its 184-year history. Want to talk about Women's History Month? Let's talk. So when I've been in these congregations, what I have found is welcoming. Even if there is, Danny, that conservative theological bent to say that's not the way we believe, Reverend, or what we practice, there is still the spirit of welcome when I am there or when I visit. And so each congregation, though, seeks God, receives God's revelation of Scripture and God's love for them in the way that they are able to embrace it, and they live that out. We have pastors in this LGBTQIA plus pastors serving in this region. Okay, we have spouses that are serving congregations of same-sex marriages. And so someone asked me when I became regional minister, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to ordain these people? Are you going to marry them? I said, the general minister and president stood on the stage And she made me, I had to take vows that I would do my job. And when a person comes through our commission on ministry, the body of 12, of a commission of 12 lay and 12 preachers who say this person has satisfied the credentials to be affirmed to be ordained for ministry, I have to ordain that person. I took a vow that is, so I said, I'm not here to argue about a person's sexual orientation. That's not what I'm here to argue about. I'm here to affirm the call of God on a person's life, not judge anything about them. So it's a tender line that I walk in this region. That's a tender line, okay? And I know I walk it every day, but I stand firm on the fact that I know what my job is. So tonight I have been encouraged by the two of you. You all are, I said they need some what is that the guys used to wear? They need some armor on. These are warriors right here. These two gentlemen are warriors. That's what they are. So thank you for being with us this evening.
Yeah,
And thank
I appreciate you guys having us. Yeah, and I would also say my bishop would agree very wholeheartedly with what you just said about his job is to affirm the call, and like I think part of it is understanding our place within the system, right? And our job as pastors is to love God and love neighbor and help our congregations do that the best we can, right? So
I like this statement. I'm not going to allow my place at the table to cause anyone else to lose their place at the table. I like that statement.
Good one.
Yeah, I like that statement.
I feel like just kind of in some closing comments that a lot of our congregations do feel like it's an all or nothing stance for them. And so to hear, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing stance, but be who you claim to be. Don't get on the bandwagon and claim to be something that as a congregation you're not ready to be yet. So be who you are.
I think,
yeah.
I was going to say, I think the clearest phrase that we could ever use is just clarity is kindness.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I would love to, I would have existed here even if they weren't open and affirming, because it was what I desired in a church, right? But just knowing ahead of time, like what causes hurt is when people just don't know. And it's okay to be where you are and who you are, but just be honest about it. You know, be open and honest about who you are as a church.
Well, Bishop Melvin, would you like to send us out with some departure or benediction or prayer? That would be lovely.
I will send us out with these words. Let us not allow our seat at the table to cost anyone else their seat at the table, and go and be who you are and allow others to be who they are. Amen.
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 Hey, I'll see you at General Assembly.
General Assembly, we'll see you there, Drake.
Absolutely.
Look for me.
Bring Danny. It's not his assembly, but maybe you can sneak him in.
Maybe
Hey, I love church gatherings, so y'all just tell me when it is and I'll find a way to be there. So.
All
That's
right.
Danny, I'm entitled to 2 voting members. You want to join my church real quick? I'm kidding.
Thank you guys.
Don't ever say that again.
Y'all have
Thank
a good
you.
night.
You all have
Hey,
a great
you too.
evening.
Good night, everybody.
Thank
Goodbye.
you all. It was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right, I'm hopping off, Jamie. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
You too.